Hey everyone, it's Ardith, and I'm here on the Ellen Hudson blog and YouTube channel to talk a bit about ink blending for this month's Innovations with Ardith. Ink blending is one of those techniques that is a staple in your repertoire, but I know that sometimes people find it challenging to get the look they want. Hey, I find it challenging sometimes too. The thing it takes the most of is patience, and I don't always have a lot of that. We're going to talk about inks, blending tools, paper, and surfaces that you can use. Everyone who ink blends has their own preferences, so it's good to try out a few things to see what works best for you. Let's start with inks. Pretty much any inks will blend if you're patient enough, but there are several that have been designed specifically with ink blending in mind. Distress inks were the first inks to really be marketed for blending. They're a dye ink and they're quite translucent. They blend easily on smooth cardstock and they're water reactive, which means that when you spritz water on them, they'll change color. I'm blending a rainbow of them here, and I have a few tips. First, start with your blending tool, whichever one it is, off the page and bring it onto the page. This should reduce the chance of getting blotches and harsh lines. Next, keep two inks open at a time. After you've put down the second color, it often helps to go back with the first color to blend them together a bit more. Third, and this is something I didn't do here and you can tell, I usually find orange to yellow and then yellow to green to be tricky blends, and a really good way to smooth them out is to find a color in between the two. Then you're blending, for example, orange to an orangey yellow to yellow, which will look smoother. And finally, don't be afraid to layer it up and go back over it a few times. The more ink you have on your paper, the better it will blend. And speaking of paper, I usually use Neenah 80 pound as it's smooth and white. If you struggle with ink blending, give Bristol Smooth cardstock a try. It's very smooth and it's easy to get a good blend on it, but it isn't quite white, so you may need to rethink what color your card base is going to be. I chose 6 shades of Distress inks to create a rainbow, and I'll do another panel with similar shades of Catherine Pooler inks. There's not a big difference in either the feel or blending results between these two types of inks, but Catherine's inks also stamp very crisply and give beautiful full coverage, and the fact that I can use them for pretty much everything I do, plus the vibrant colors in the collection, make these my favorites. I'm working on my waffle flower water media mat, and you can see that throughout I've been cleaning it off when I get a lot of ink on it. Because it's not porous, the ink will sit there, and you may end up picking it up with your brush and contaminating your blend. You can also use a glass or metal mat for ink blending if that's what you have. And oh yes, if it's not looking beautiful as you're working, don't worry too much. These inks will often smooth out as they dry and look much better than you thought they would. Next, I did another panel, this time with Distress Oxides. These inks are hybrid inks with special properties. They're creamy and smooth, and they are so easy to blend. They start out vibrant, and they fade back a bit as they dry, and they do leave kind of a chalky finish. But you can use them on dark cardstock, and I'll show you how that looks in a minute. Now, this has definitely been the year of the blending brush. These brushes have very fine bristles, and they make it so easy to get a smooth blend on your cardstock. The Ranger mini blending tools also do a good job, but it's sometimes harder for me to avoid harsh lines from the edges of the sponges, so I tend to stick with the blending brushes. I have enough of them for all my favorite ink colors, and then if I ever need to use a color that I don't have a brush for, I just choose the brush closest in color and I use that. To clean them, you just rub them against a paper towel to take off most of the ink. If you want to do a deeper cleaning, you can use a baby wipe, and you can also wash them with dish soap in your sink for a really deep clean. Just make sure they're completely dry before you use them again. All 3 of these inks are water reactive, which means that when you splatter water like I'm doing here, the inks will fade and you can pick up the color to create a textured speckly effect. And here's another easy way to use some ink blending. You can blend ink through a stencil or over a mask. I'm using the Distress ink panel and a Catherine Pooler stencil, and I'm blending the same Distress ink colors through the stencil so that I'll get a subtle tone-on-tone effect. By changing the exact place where I changed the color this time, I'll get an even smoother blend on my panel. And here's the 3 panels. Distress ink on the left, Catherine Pooler in the center, and the oxides on the right. They have very similar colors and blends, so you can see that it's really up to you to decide which one works best for you. Next, I'm going to use the same 6 oxide colors, but on black cardstock this time. This is one of the ways these inks are really special. They actually show up on the dark cardstock. I noticed that I had a harder time telling the orange, yellow, and green apart, but overall, I think a panel done like this would make a very pretty galaxy sky. I want to show you a quick card that uses only ink blending and masking to create a night sky with different colors of blue Catherine Pooler ink. I'm using the star from the Hearth and Home set and the crescent moon from Space Out to create a night sky. I started by cutting a ton of masks and placing them all over the panel with the moon in the top left. Then I remembered my sentiment, and I lifted a few of the stars near the bottom, and I placed a die-cut Birch Press Designs piece that had been cut from Post-it tape. I put the stars back in place around the piece die cut, and I got ready to start my ink blending. So there are 2 ways to do this. I could have blended my lightest blue ink over the first layer with just a few masks on, and then added some more masks, and then some darker blue ink, and so on, but I went in the opposite direction, and I started with my darkest color, Juniper Mist. Now you can see my lack of patience in full force. I'm not getting a smooth blend here at all, am I? At this stage, I really just want a lot of color all over the panel, so I'm not working slowly, I'm just quickly putting it down. And I'm not too worried because the ink will smooth out quite a bit as it dries, and if it's not completely smooth, I figure some texture in a night sky will just look like clouds. When I had the panel covered in that darkest ink, I lifted up a few of the star masks and I went over the panel with my next darkest ink, Suede Shoes. So this layer of white stars will not remain white for long. They'll be covered in this ink and they'll look like they're further in the distance. Then I repeated the process of lifting the masks off a few more stars and I blended the next color, Something Borrowed, over the white stars. My masks are made from full back sticky notes. With the points on these stars, you want them really stuck down so that the blending brushes don't lift any of the points up. I repeated the process once again, and this time I used a large brush, and It's a Boy ink. This is the one color I've designated a large brush to. I find that the larger brushes work really well for me when I want a pale, soft blend over a large area, such as a daytime sky. Finally, I was left with just the moon and the piece masks on my panel, and when I removed them, they're white and crisp. I love the look of this. It feels like an illustration from a children's book to me. This technique would work with lots of other shapes and color schemes too. I can imagine hearts in pinks and reds, or snowflakes in blacks, grays, and white. Like any technique, it takes practice and patience, but once you figure out which combination of tools works for you, you're on your way to beautiful ink blending. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up below and subscribe to this channel for more inspiration. There's lots more information and product links on Ellen's blog, so be sure to check that out. Thanks so much for stopping by today. See you next time.